A cold and powerful doctor is forced to marry a 25-year-old virgin. The unexpected happens. Standing before the crowd in the hospital auditorium, he looked untouchable, wearing a perfectly tailored white coat and eyes as cold as the steel of his surgical tools. Dr. Nathan Carter walked the halls like a king crossing his empire. He was feared, admired, and most of all utterly alone. A man who had buried every emotion under layers of absolute control. A survivor of traumas no one dared to ask about. But that day, without even knowing it, his life was about to be turned upside down by the terms of a will. A will that came with a name, a face, and a pair of eyes that would one day learn how to disarm him. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you amazing romances like this one. Emily Bennett would be turning 25 in just a few weeks, and while birthdays are usually something to celebrate, for her it felt like a countdown. Orphaned at 17, raised by the grandfather who loved her more than anything, she had spent years chasing the dream of becoming a doctor, just like him. It was her purpose, her promise, his legacy. But fate, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. When Dr. Charles Bennett died suddenly, he didn't just take her heart, he took the ground beneath her feet. Emily was left grieving, broke, and on the verge of losing everything she'd worked for, until the lawyer showed up. And with him, the reading of a will that sounded more like a cruel joke. Emily Bennett will inherit the estate only if, before turning 25, she marries a man of impeccable reputation and standing in the medical field. The suggested candidate, Dr. Nathan Carter. She almost laughed. How could someone she barely knew be the key to her future? Nathan Carter was legendary, sure, but also untouchable. A 38-year-old neurosurgeon, feared by residents, internationally respected for his near-miraculous surgeries, and infamous for his emotional detachment, the last man she'd ever imagine as a husband. But reality didn't care about feelings. Emily needed the inheritance, and Nathan, upon discovering he'd been named in a will as the ideal husband for a 25-year-old virgin med student, responded, in the only way he knew how, with cold disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he said flatly, flipping through the documents. "A marriage, by obligation, with a girl I've met twice?" And yet something made him keep reading. Something. About the photo attached a quiet hope in Emily's smile, even through her grief. He recognized that kind of strength. He'd learned how to survive when everything fell apart too. Their first meeting was tense and silent. Emily, dressed simply with her hair pulled back, stared at him with unwavering calm. There was no seduction, no desperation, just a pact. "I'm not asking for your love, Dr. Carter," she said firmly. "I just need a chance to finish what I started. A contract, nothing more." Nathan studied her for a long moment. There was something disarming about her honesty that struck deeper than he liked. A reminder that he too had once believed in dreams, before learning to amputate them. "Very well," he finally replied. "If it's just a contract, it'll be like a surgery. Precise, clean, no attachment." But even he couldn't predict that this rational agreement would awaken everything he thought he'd buried. That this 25-year-old girl, untouched, not just in body, but in bitterness and resentment, would reach places inside him that even medicine couldn't heal. The paperwork was signed in the following days. The wedding was set for 10 days later, a small ceremony, no family, no feelings, just the two of them and a judge. But something began to shift, quietly, invisible. It lived in sidelong glances, in the silence that lingered too long, in the touches that almost happened. Emily stayed in a guest room at Nathan's sleek, modern apartment. He didn't treat her with cruelty, but with surgical neutrality. Still, every night, she'd hear his footsteps in the library, his sigh when he turned off the light. And she felt it. She knew there was pain there. Pain without a name, a pain she might just understand. Emily wasn't scared. She'd grown up surviving silence, and she knew that sometimes, silence spoke louder than words. One night, while making herself some tea, she found him in the kitchen, hunched over a book, glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up, surprised not by her presence, but by something he couldn't name. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently, with a small smile. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "You too." She lifted her cup and smiled. That night, they didn't sleep together, but something inside both of them began to stir. And what started as a marriage of convenience no longer felt so simple. They thought it was just a contract, until one look changed everything. The ceremony came and went like a whisper brief, emotionless, clinical, just a signature, a handshake, and a silent exchange of rings. No flowers, no vows, no family photos. It was, in every way, a transaction. And yet, as Nathan placed the ring on Emily's finger, something in his chest stirred, a flicker, like muscle memory from a life he no longer believed in. Emily didn't expect warmth. She didn't expect kindness. But she did expect indifference. What she didn't anticipate was loneliness. In the days that followed, they settled into an awkward rhythm. Nathan left for the hospital before sunrise, returning only after dark. Emily spent most of her time studying in the guest room or reading in the quiet corners of the apartment. They spoke rarely, mostly about logistics, schedules, or mail. It was as if they were strangers on opposite sides of a paper-thin wall, close enough to feel the other's presence, but not enough to truly see them. But sometimes, silence can be a kind of intimacy, like the time Nathan found her asleep on the couch, medical books open across her lap, a highlighter still in hand. He stood there for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall, her brow furrowed even in sleep. Carefully, he took the book from her hands, placed a blanket over her, and turned off the light. He told himself it was nothing, or the night she cooked dinner because the fridge was empty and Nathan hadn't eaten in what looked like days. He arrived home, exhausted, to find a warm meal waiting not out of obligation, but quiet concern. He didn't say thank you, but he sat across from her, and for the first time, they ate together. The silence between them started to soften. It was during one of those long, quiet evenings that Emily dared to ask, "Why did you agree to this?" Me. Nathan looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, simply, "Because your grandfather once saved my father's life. He gave me a chance I didn't deserve. I guess this was mine to give." She hadn't known, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest not as a burden, but as something deeper, a thread connecting them that neither had seen until now. Still, Nathan was a fortress. He kept his emotions locked away like surgical tools, sterilized, contained, unreachable. And Emily, for all her strength, carried her own scars. Her dreams, though intact, bore the weight of too much loss. But sometimes, two broken hearts beat stronger together. One evening, Nathan came home with blood on his collar and weariness carved into his face. He collapsed onto the couch without a word. Emily approached cautiously. "Long day." He nodded. Then, after a long pause, "Lost a boy in surgery. 6 years old. Nothing I did was enough." It was the first time he'd spoken of failure, and it broke something open. Emily sat beside him, unsure what to say. Instead, she rested her hand on his. "Eden, pull away." For minutes, they just breathed together. Later that night, he passed by her room on the way to his own and stopped at the door. She looked up from her book, startled. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Voice low. "This arrangement." She closed the book. "I used to, but not lately." He nodded once and walked away, but neither of them slept that night. The distance between them was no longer vast, it was electric tense. One accidental touch, one too long glance, and something would break. The next morning, Emily woke to find a note at her door. "You're not invisible, Emily. I see you." And her hands trembled as she held it, because deep down, she had always wanted to be seen. Not for what she could become, but for who she already was. In that moment, everything shifted. What had begun as a cold, calculated deal was no longer so clear. Somewhere in the quiet spaces, between avoidance and acceptance, something fragile was growing. And neither of them was ready for how much it would change them. What began as distance turned into something undeniable. The note changed everything. It was simple, just a few words. But for Emily, it felt like the first genuine crack in the armor Nathan had so carefully worn. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't flowery, but it was real. It meant he had been watching. Not in a controlling way, but in a way that meant he noticed her. Her presence, her silence, her trying. And that was more than most had ever given her. She didn't respond right away. Not with words. Instead, the next evening, Nathan came home. To the smell of warm bread and something vaguely familiar. It was stew. He hadn't tasted that particular recipe in years. "How did you?" he asked, entering the kitchen, unbuttoning the cuffs of his shirt, still in SCR. UBS. Emily smiled shyly. "Your father mentioned it in an old interview I found. Said your mom used to make it when you had a bad week. I figured. Maybe this week wasn't great." Nathan didn't speak. He just looked at her. Really looked. There it was again, that soft rebellion. She carried the ability to see someone's pain without trying to fix it, without pity. Just. Being there, they ate in near silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was thoughtful, full of things unsaid. After the dishes were done, they sat in the living room, each with a book in hand, sharing the same space. For the first time, it didn't feel like a contract. It felt like company. And the shifts kept coming. Small, but powerful. Nathan started leaving earlier in the morning, but not before checking if Emily needed anything. He didn't say much, but the cup of tea left by her door at 6:15 a.m. spoke volumes. In return, Emily left sticky notes with anatomical mnemonics on the bathroom mirror. He never said thank you, but one night she found her favorite brand of chocolate on the kitchen counter, wrapped with a silent message, "I see you too." One Thursday evening, she woke from a nightmare-cold sweat, shallow breaths, the past clawing at her chest. She didn't scream. She never did. But Nathan must have heard the soft thud of her feet hitting the floor, because minutes later, he stood in the doorway. "Bad dream?" he asked, his voice raspy with sleep. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He didn't ask questions, just crossed the room, sat on the edge of her bed, and handed her a glass of water. "You're safe here," he said. 3 words, but to her, they meant everything. That night, she fell asleep with the sound of his breathing nearby. A silence that, for the first time, made her feel protected, and Nathan didn't go back to sleep. He sat in the dark for a long time, wondering. When her presence had started to soothe him, wondering when he began listening for her footsteps, wondering when he had started needing her. He had promised himself this would be clean, transactional, but Emily wasn't something you could manage through his warmth in winter. A melody after silence. He didn't know how to shut her out anymore. Then came the gala, the hospital's annual charity event. Was one of the biggest nights of the year. Black tie, press donors, and a guest list full of names Nathan preferred to avoid. But this time, he had a wife, and the board insisted she attend. Emily stood before the mirror, nervous. The dress was simple, elegant, navy blue, modest neckline, a soft slit up the side. Her hair fell in gentle waves, and for once, she wore makeup. She looked like herself, only luminous. Nathan, in a tailored tux, entered the room and froze. Emily turned, unsure. Is it too much? He shook his head slowly, eyes scanning her, not like a man inspecting but like one fighting the urge to admire. You look beautiful. She smiled. Thank you, husband. It was teasing, of course. But for a second, neither of them laughed. The gala, they played their roles. While he was stoic, she was poised, but there was something else. When Emily touched his arm, he didn't flinch. When she smiled at a compliment, he found himself smiling too. But the true shift came when a young nurse approached them with wide eyes. You're Dr. Carter's wife? She asked Emily. Before she could answer, Nathan did. Yes, he said, voice firm. She is, and just like that, something settled between them, like a truth that didn't need explanation. Later that night, after she slipped off her heels and he poured her a glass of water, they stood in the quiet kitchen, hearts louder than words. I'm sorry I've been cold, Nathan said. Finally, Emily looked at him, soft but steady. You haven't been cold? You've been careful. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, do you regret it? Us. She stepped closer, now only inches between them. No, she whispered. He reached up, slowly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered just a second too long. Her breath caught, and just before he stepped back he said, me neither. Whatever this was, it was no longer pretend. A touch too long, a look too honest. Nothing was pretense anymore. The days that followed the gala were charged with a different kind of energy, unspoken, fragile, and undeniable. They were still careful around each other, still holding back in their own ways. But there was no denying what had begun to take root. Nathan found himself waiting for her laughter. He began noticing the way her lips curved when she concentrated, the way she hummed when she cooked, the way she always touched the spines of books before picking one up, like choosing which soul to borrow for a while. Emily, too, was changing. She no longer felt like a guest in his home. Her textbooks spilled over into the living room. Her slippers were left under the couch. She hung her coat next to his. It was still a contract on paper, but in practice, it was starting to look a lot like a life shared. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the window panes, Nathan returned from a surgery later than usual. His face was drawn, his shoulders slumped. Emily looked up from her desk. Everything okay? He hesitated before answering. Complications. A clot. I lost her. Emily stood and walked over, instinct guiding her. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his, as if she had always known the shape of his sorrow. I'm sorry, she whispered. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let her hand stay. He even held it tighter. They stood there for what felt like hours, not saying anything, until he finally said, You're the first person I've let see this side of me, and I won't use it against you, she promised. Not ever. At night, he didn't sleep in his room. He didn't sleep in hers either. Instead, they stayed on the couch, side by side, shoulders touching, not quite lovers, not quite strangers. Just two souls too tired to run anymore. Nathan was the first to fall asleep. Emily stayed awake a little longer, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the crease in his brow, even in rest. She reached out and gently brushed his hair back just once. He didn't stir, but in his sleep, his fingers curled tighter around hers. The next morning was different, subtle, but different. Nathan made breakfast. Emily teased him about his terrible omelet skills. He asked if she wanted to visit the hospital garden later that week. These things might have seemed small, but for two people who had built walls so high, they were monumental. But every story needs a storm, and theirs was coming. A few days later, Emily received a call from the law firm. The estate had been fully released. The funds were now available. Her future was secure. It should have been a moment of celebration. Instead, it brought silence. Nathan stood in the doorway of her study when she told him, You're free, he said. She nodded slowly. Yes, I guess I am. Neither of them smiled, because that freedom now felt like something else. An ending. They danced around it for days, both waiting for the other to speak first. Emily began packing her textbooks again, reorganizing her folders. Nathan came home later than usual, lingering in the hospital, even when there was no need. The tension that had once been romantic was now laced with fear, because when you've allowed someone into the deepest corners of your soul, the idea of losing them is worse than never having loved at all. One night she stood by the bedroom window, the city lights flickering below. Nathan came in, loosened his tie, and stared at her for a moment. "I never asked," he said quietly. "What happens now?" Emily turned, heart pounding. "I go back to school," she said. "I finish what I started." He nodded. "And us?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "I don't know." Nathan crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. He reached out, cupping her face with both hands, his touch gentle, searching. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. Tears filled her eyes. "No, but I don't know if you want me to stay." "I never wanted you to leave," he said, voice cracking, "but I didn't think I deserved to ask you to stay." In that moment, Emily broke, and so did he. Leaned into him, and he kissed her softly, reverently, not with hunger, but with need. It wasn't passionate, it was painful, honest, a confession without words. They held each other long after the kiss ended, clinging not to a promise, but to a possibility. It was messy, unclear, imperfect, but it was real. Whatever came next, it would no longer be a performance. When feelings get too real, fear speaks louder than love. The kiss had changed everything and nothing at all. In the days that followed, Nathan became ... different, not cruel, not cold, but distant. He still made her coffee in the morning, still left notes on her textbooks, still came home early, just to be near her. But the warmth that had finally started to bloom between them was now guarded, hesitant, pulled back like a tide. Preparing for the storm, Emily felt it instantly. The way his eyes didn't linger as long, the way his touches became absent-minded, the way his silence, once full of meaning, now felt hollow. And the worst part, she understood it because falling in love wasn't part of the agreement, and neither of them had any idea what to do with what they were now feeling. One evening, Emily tried to break the silence. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly, sitting beside him on the couch. Nathan didn't look at her, just tired. She turned to him fully. "Is that all?" He sighed. "Emily, I don't know what this is anymore, and I'm not sure you do either." Her heart dropped. "I know exactly what this is," she replied, eyes stinging. "It's not just a contract anymore. It hasn't been for a while." His jaw clenched. "That's the problem." Silence fell like a thunderclap. She stood, stunned. "Why is that a problem, Nathan?" "Because feelings complicate things," he snapped. "Because people leave, people lie, they die, and feelings ... feelings destroy everything when they go wrong." He stood now too, voice rising despite himself. "I had control, I knew the rules, and then you came in, and you made me care." Emily's voice broke. "And that's wrong." "No," he said, eyes dark and desperate. "It's terrifying." She didn't speak again. She couldn't, not when every word he said was a blow straight to her chest. Nathan turned away, running a hand through his hair, his breathing shallow. "I just ... I need space." Emily nodded slowly, tears now falling freely. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll give you that." And that night, for the first time since they'd begun this strange, beautiful mess, they slept in different rooms, not out of necessity, but out of choice. The next morning, Emily was gone. She didn't slam doors. She didn't leave a dramatic letter. Just a simple note on the kitchen counter. "I love you enough to walk away when you're not ready, but I won't stay where I'm unwanted." Nathan read it 3 times before he realized. His hands were shaking. He had wanted space, and now he had it. But the apartment felt colder than it ever had, quieter. Wrong? Her mug was still in the sink, her slippers still under the couch. Her scent lingered in the hallway. But Emily ... Emily was gone. Days passed, then a week. Nathan buried himself in work, took every shift, volunteered for extra surgeries, stayed at the hospital until exhaustion forced him home. But the emptiness followed him, because the truth was, she had become his home. One night, after a particularly grueling operation, he sat in his office, staring at the surgical records, and saw her name scribbled on the corner of a page. Emily. She must have doodled it while waiting for him. One day, and that's when it hit him. She had already taken his name, not legally, emotionally. She had become part of him, the part that believed in something more than just survival, the part that dared to dream again. And he had pushed her away, because he was afraid of needing her, afraid of losing her, afraid of being seen, and then being left behind. But she hadn't left because she didn't love him. She had left because she did, and he had broken her heart in the process. Nathan leaned back in his chair, covering his face with both hands. He wasn't a man who cried, but that night, he did. Not because he was weak, but because he finally understood the cost of not loving out loud. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you truly had. Nathan Carter had spent a lifetime mastering control. In the OR, he could steady a hand no matter the chaos around him. He could silence fear with a scalpel and save lives with precision. But outside the operating room, with no monitors beeping, no protocol to follow, he was lost. And he had never felt more lost than now standing in his penthouse apartment, holding the note Emily left behind. "I love you enough to walk away when you're not ready, but I won't stay where I'm unwanted." Unwanted. The word echoed louder than anything else. He had made her feel unwanted, when all she had ever done was care. She had never demanded anything from him, never asked for more than what he was ready to give. She simply stayed, and that was her love language. And he had answered with silence, with fear, with distance. Nathan closed his eyes, pressing the heel of his palms into his temples. For days, he had buried himself in work, trying to drown out the sound of her laughter that haunted the empty rooms. He had opened his closet and found her cardigan still hanging next to his coat. He had turned on the TV and seen her favorite medical documentary still paused where she'd left it. Everything reminded him of her, but it was in the absence of her presence that he finally understood her worth. She hadn't just stepped into his apartment, she had stepped into his life, his soul, and gently, carefully, she had rearranged it. He sat on the floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside, and finally let the walls collapse. His chest ached, not from guilt, from grief, the grief of pushing away something precious because it didn't fit into his tidy definition of control. Control hadn't saved him. Love might. It was time to stop running. The next morning, Nathan drove across the city to the one person who had known both him and Emily well, Mr. Peterson. The lawyer who had delivered the will that changed their lives. He didn't hesitate. I need to know where she is. The older man gave him a long, measured look. Are you asking because you want her back, or because you hate being alone? Nathan didn't flinch. I'm asking because I was a coward, and I've never been more sure of anything than I am of her. Peterson studied him for a moment, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. She's at the Bennett family cabin. Your late father-in-law's old place. Upstate. No phone signal. No distractions. Nathan didn't wait another second. He drove 4 hours through winding roads, rain tapping gently on the windshield, heart pounding faster with every mile. He didn't rehearse his speech. He didn't know what he'd say. He only knew one thing. He had to see her. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. The air was crisp, the scent of pine sharp in his lungs. He spotted her car by the front porch and his heart nearly leaped out of his chest. Lights flickered through the window. She was inside. He climbed the steps and raised his hand to knock but paused. For a moment, he hesitated. What if she didn't want to see him? What if he was too late? But then, the door opened. And there she was. Standing barefoot, wrapped in a sweater too big for her frame, eyes wide with disbelief. Nathan, he swallowed hard. Hi. Emily stood frozen. What are you doing here? I came to tell you something, he said softly, and I won't leave until I do. She didn't speak, just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, heart thundering. The cabin smelled like her, safe, warm. I was wrong, he began. I thought pushing you away would protect me, but all it did was prove how much I need you. Emily looked down, hugging herself. You didn't need me when I was begging you to let me in. I know, he whispered, and I hate myself for that. He took a step closer. You changed me, Emily. You made me remember what it's like to feel, to care, to hope, and that terrified me. She looked up now, tears brimming. So what changed? You left, he said, and I realized I wasn't afraid of loving you. I was afraid you wouldn't love me back, that I wasn't enough. Her voice broke. You are. He reached for her, hesitating. May I? She didn't answer with words. She stepped into his arms and buried her face in his chest. And there, in that quiet cabin, far from the city and the noise, Nathan Carter, world-renowned neurosurgeon, emotionally detached perfectionist, the woman he'd tried so hard not to love, and knew he never wanted to let her go again. Love isn't about perfection, I tease about staying, when it's easier to run. The morning after Nathan arrived at the cabin felt like the calm after a long, relentless storm. Emily stood on the back porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, cradling a mug of coffee in her hands. The early sun bathed the lake in a golden glow, the water still and soft like glass. She hadn't spoken much after they'd held each other in silence the night before, but she hadn't asked him to leave either. Inside, Nathan stood in the small kitchen, watching her through the window, holding a cup of tea he hadn't touched. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something not quite forgiven, not yet free of guilt, but finally ready to stop hiding behind fear. When he stepped outside, Emily didn't turn. She knew he was there. Do you remember? She said softly. The night I asked if you regretted marrying me. He nodded. Yes. You never answered. Nathan exhaled, because I didn't know how. She turned then, slowly, facing him. Her eyes weren't cold, but they were tired, wounded, still healing. I do now, he said. I don't regret it. Not even for a second. But I regret the way I treated you. I regret every moment I made you feel alone under my roof. I regret being too much of a coward to say what you meant to me when it mattered most. Emily looked at him in silence, her fingers tightening around the mug. I can't go back and fix it, he added, but I can promise you something new, if you'll let me. She studied him, searching his face for cracks, lies, hesitation. She found none. I don't want a contract anymore, Nathan, she said quietly. I want a real marriage, with love, with flaws, with honesty. He stepped closer. That's all I want to, and I don't want to be the only one fighting for it this time. You won't be, he said. Not ever again. He held out his hand, not like a doctor, not like a business partner, like a man offering his whole heart, stripped of ego. She took it. And in that moment, something shifted, not suddenly, not explosively, but deeply. They stayed at the cabin for a few more days, cooking simple meals together, reading by the fire, taking long walks in the forest, saying all the things they never had time or courage to say. Nathan told her about his mother, who had abandoned the family when he was 12, how he never cried, how he convinced himself it was better to feel nothing than to risk being left again. Emily told him about the day her grandfather died in her arms, how she tried to resuscitate him, how she blamed herself for not saving him, even though she knew it wasn't her fault. They didn't try to fix each other, they simply held space for the pain, and in that shared vulnerability, something beautiful grew one night. As they lay under the stars, wrapped in one blanket, Emily whispered, "Do you think we would have fallen in love if it weren't for the will?" Nathan turned to her, brushing a hair from her cheek. "I think I would have fallen for you in any life. The will just gave me the excuse to be near you long enough to realize it." She smiled. "Romantic. Terrifying," he corrected, "but real." They kissed. Not like people trying to prove something, but like people who finally understood what it meant to choose one another, not by law, not by logic, but by love. When they returned to the city, everything was the same, and yet, completely different. Emily moved back into the apartment, but this time, into the same room as Nathan. They cooked dinner together, argued over grocery lists, left love notes on bathroom mirrors, laughed over ridiculous patient stories, shared long tired hugs after hard days. One Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, Emily found the original marriage contract. She held it in her hands, stared at it for a long moment, then walked to the balcony where Nathan was reading. "Do you still want this?" she asked, holding it up. He looked at it, then back at her. "No," she nodded. Then, without another word, she tore it in half. And just like that, the last piece of the past was gone. They were no longer bound by conditions, only by choice. Asterisk, when love takes root, life finds a way to bloom. Weeks passed, time didn't race anymore. It unfolded gently, like pages in a well-loved book. There was no need for urgency, not when everything between Nathan and Emily had begun to feel ... natural, grounded, true. Their mornings started with sleepy smiles and quiet rituals. Emily would steal the newspaper before Nathan, pretending to read while secretly watching him, stir his coffee, always, exactly 3 times. He would pretend not to notice, but his lips curved ever so slightly when she did. The once cold, sterile apartment had transformed into something warm and lived in. There were always flowers on the table, not expensive bouquets, but simple ones from the corner stand. Daisies, wildflowers, things Emily liked. Nathan never said he brought them, but she knew. They were no longer walking on eggshells, they were walking in rhythm. Yet something subtle began to change. Emily felt it first, the fatigue, the sudden nausea, the way her body felt unfamiliar, as if it was shifting before she could catch up. At first she thought it was stress. She had been studying long hours, volunteering at the hospital, adjusting to this new and very real version of her life with Nathan. But then came the moment in the clinic. She had gone in to shadow a pediatric cardiologist. Midway through a routine appointment, the doctor smiled kindly and asked, "Are you expecting?" Emily blinked. "Excuse me. Your color, your temperature, the way you keep touching your stomach. I've seen it 100 times. You might want to check." The words echoed all the way home. She didn't tell Nathan that day, or the next. Not because she didn't trust him, but because the thought itself was too overwhelming, too sacred. She needed to be sure before she let herself feel everything that was already forming in her chest. She took the test alone, sat on the bathroom floor for 10 minutes, heart racing, hands trembling, 2 lines. Positive. The air left her lungs. She stared at the tiny window, like it held the answers to her entire life. She was going to be a mother. Nathan Carter, her once cold husband, who swore he'd never open his heart, was going to be a father. And she was terrified. But beneath the fear, there was joy. Raw, pulsing, breathtaking joy. She made his favorite dinner that night. Rosemary chicken with roasted potatoes, lit candles, played soft jazz on the speakers. Nathan noticed something was different. She didn't speak much. Her smile was nervous. Her hands fidgeted with the napkin. After dinner, they sat on the couch, side by side, and then she handed him a tiny white envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Just open it." Inside was a card plain. No words, just a photo of a positive pregnancy test. Nathan stared at it for a long time, frozen. When he finally looked up, Emily's eyes were full of tears. "I wanted to be sure," she said softly, "and I wanted to tell you the right way. I know we didn't plan this." I know he reached for her before she could finish. Not with panic, not with confusion. But with awe. "Emily," he breathed. "You're pregnant." She nodded, emotion thick in her throat. He placed a trembling hand over her stomach, his voice breaking. "There's a baby. Our baby." She nodded again. "Yes." Nathan closed his eyes, his forehead resting gently against hers. "I've saved hundreds of lives," he whispered. "But this is the first one that feels like a miracle." She laughed through her tears. "So you're not ... scared?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I'm also the happiest I've ever been." And then he pulled her into his arms. Not as the surgeon, not as the man who once feared love, but as the man who now had everything he never knew he wanted. Later that night, Nathan sat with his hand resting over her belly as she slept. There were no words left, only breath, only the steady rhythm of two hearts, and now, a third, beating in harmony, beating in harmony. Love grows where courage and fear walk hand in hand. Pregnancy didn't come with a guidebook. There were books, yes, articles, videos, checklists, but nothing could prepare Emily or Nathan for the whirlwind of emotions that came with knowing their lives were about to change forever. For Emily, it was the slow, quiet transformation of her body, the tenderness, the exhaustion, the fierce, inexplicable protectiveness that bloomed in her chest the moment she realized there was a heartbeat inside her, a tiny, fluttering pulse that belonged to both of them. For Nathan, it was a different kind of reckoning. He wasn't just a husband now. He was going to be a father. The word felt foreign in his mouth. Heavy. He had spent years perfecting detachment, believing it made him stronger, but now, he was staring at ultrasound images with trembling hands, memorizing each curve of the little shape inside the outline of a future he had never allowed himself to dream of. And with the joy came fear. I don't know how to do this, Nathan admitted one night, as they lay in bed, her head on his shoulder, his fingers gently tracing her arm. Emily didn't need to ask what this meant. Neither do I, she whispered. But we'll figure it out. What if I mess it up? What if I can't be what they need? She lifted her head, looking at him with soft certainty. You already are. Nathan stared at the ceiling. I didn't have an example. My father was barely present. My mother left. I don't even know what a father is supposed to be. Emily kissed his chest, right over his heart. You'll be the kind who stays. That night, Nathan held her longer than usual. And in the months that followed, he proved her right. He went to every appointment, even when it meant rescheduling surgeries. He built the crib himself, even though it took him 6 hours. 2 arguments, with the manual, and 1 minor injury. He massaged her back without her asking. He talked to her belly every night, telling their child about the world in a voice softer than anyone had ever heard from him before. And when the baby kicked for the first time, Nathan cried. No one saw it but Emily, and that made it sacred. But not everything was perfect. There were days when Emily woke up overwhelmed by fear of losing the baby, of not being enough, of the unknown. She'd cry quietly in the shower, trying not to worry Nathan. There were nights when he sat alone in the dark, haunted by questions he couldn't answer. Would he pass on the parts of himself he had worked so hard to bury? One afternoon, Emily found him in the nursery, sitting on the floor, staring at the tiny clothes they had folded together. You okay? She asked gently. He didn't look up. What if I become the man I promised never to be? She crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his hands. You won't, she said simply, because you're already fighting not to, because you show up, because you care. That's all our child will ever need, a father who loves without leaving. Nathan pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. And that night, they wrote a letter to their baby, a tradition Emily's grandfather once did for her. In it, they promised love, honesty, imperfection, and the courage to show up, no matter how afraid they were. By the time the 3rd trimester came, their lives had changed in every way. The apartment became a home. The silence between them, once filled with tension, was now filled with music, with laughter, with arguments over baby names and debates over diaper brands. They were a team, messy, flawed, learning every day, but undeniably together. One rainy Sunday morning, as they lay in bed watching the city blur behind foggy windows, Emily turned to Nathan with a sleepy smile. We never got a real honeymoon, she said. He smirked. We got a fake marriage, a real baby, and a crash course in love. I'd say we're ahead of schedule, she laughed. Would you do it all again? Nathan didn't even pause. Yes, even the worst days, especially those. She looked at him. Why? He kissed her gently. Because they led me to you. Sometimes. The most beautiful beginnings start with the scariest moments. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt too ordinary to carry a miracle. The skies were gray, the city restless, and Nathan had left early for a complex surgical consult. Emily had insisted she was fine. The doctor said the baby might not come for another week, but babies, like love, had a mind of their own. 11:42 a.m. The first contraction hit. It wasn't gentle. Emily froze in the middle of the living room, hand on the back of the couch, her breath catching like a snapped violin string. She waited, hoping it was false labor, hoping it would pass at DIDN. Single quotes T. By the time the second contraction came, sharper, stronger, more insistent, she knew the baby was coming. She tried to call Nathan, but his phone went straight to voicemail. For the first time in months, panic rose like a tide. She paced, breathing through the pain, heart pounding louder than reason. She finally called the hospital. Tell Dr. Carter, his wife is in labor. Please just tell him. 30 minutes later, a knock rattled the door. It wasn't Nathan, it was their neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who Emily had once shared banana bread with in the elevator. She smiled warmly, already holding car keys. I'm your ride, she said. Let's go meet that baby. The drive was a blur of pain and breath and Mrs. Patel's surprisingly calming Bollywood playlist. By the time they reached the hospital, Emily could barely walk. They rushed her in. Nurses, IVs, monitors, everything spun in motion, but one person was missing. Nathan. She gripped the sheets, tears pooling in her eyes not from pain, but from fear. Where is he? She whispered. He promised. And then the door slammed open. Nathan burst into the room, still half in scrubs, hospital badge swinging around his neck, sweat clinging to his brow. His eyes found hers instantly. I'm here, he breathed. Didn't ask how he got there. She just reached for his hand and refused to let go. The hours that followed were the longest of their lives. Emily labored through the pain with quiet strength, her fingers digging into Nathan's palm. He whispered to her between contractions, not medical advice, but promises, vows. You're doing so well. I've never been prouder. I'm right here, she screamed, cried, laughed between gasps. And Nathan, who had cut through bone and stitched vessels finer than a thread, had never felt more powerless, or more in awe. And then, the cry. At 6:19 p.m. Their baby entered the world with a wail strong enough to shake Nathan to his knees. It's a girl, the nurse announced, tears in her own eyes. They placed her on Emily's chest. Tiny and wrinkled and perfect, Emily sobbed, holding her daughter like she was made of starlight. Nathan couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stared, his world narrowing to two people, the woman who changed his life, and the little girl who had just redefined it. When he finally stepped closer, Emily looked up at him with a trembling smile. She's here. He touched their daughter's cheek, barely breathing. Hi, little one, he whispered, voice breaking. I'm your dad. And in that moment, everything changed. Not in a dramatic world-ending way, but in the quiet, seismic shift of a man becoming whole. Nathan didn't know how to be a father, but as he cradled his daughter in his arms for the first time, he realized something. He didn't need to know everything, he just needed to love her, and he already did. That night, in the dim hospital room, with monitors beeping softly and Emily asleep beside him, Nathan held his daughter against his chest and whispered stories about the world. About love. About loss. About second chances. And about how the unexpected had brought him the only two people who ever truly saw him. A new life means a new kind of love, one that doesn't sleep, but never stops growing. The first night home was nothing like the books promised. There were no peaceful lullabies, no cinematic rocking chairs under moonlight. There was crying, a lot of crying. There were diapers changed in a blur, bottles prepared with trembling hands, and two parents who looked at each other with dark circles under their eyes and soft disbelief. Did we just blink and become parents? Emily whispered around 2 a.m., her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the baby monitor. Nathan leaned his head back against the couch, their newborn asleep against his chest. I think we skipped the blinking and just got hit by a truck. She laughed, tired, raw, but real, and he smiled. Because even through exhaustion, she was still the center of his world. They named her Clara. Nathan had suggested the name after a sleepless night in the NICU ward during his residency, when a nurse named Clara had held the hand of a dying child and whispered, "You are loved." He never forgot that. He wanted their daughter to carry a name that reminded them both of what love looked like, even in the darkest hours, in those first days. Love was messy. It was spit up on new shirts. It was crying because the baby wouldn't stop crying. It was learning to take turns napping, burning toast at 4 a.m., and forgetting what silence felt like. But love was also everything. It was Nathan staying up through the night, whispering stories about constellations to Clara so Emily could sleep for 3 uninterrupted hours. It was Emily, half awake, humming softly to their daughter in the shower steam, rocking her side to side like instinct. It was their hands brushing in the dark as they reached for her at the same time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One morning, a few weeks in, Nathan stood in the nursery holding Clara in one arm while reading aloud from a pediatric journal. He swore it helped her sleep. Emily watched from the door, a cup of tea in her hand, tears stinging her eyes. "You look like you've been doing this forever," she said softly. He turned, startled, then gave a shy smile. "I'm making it up as I go." "Well, you're doing it beautifully." Nathan looked down at the tiny bundle in his arms. "She terrifies me," he confessed. "But not the way love used to." Emily stepped closer. "How does it scare you now?" "It scares me how much I'd do for her, how much I already would give up. My career, my pride, my own heartbeat, everything." She reached up and kissed his cheek. "That's being a father." Later, that week, Emily sat down to write in her old journal, the one she hadn't opened since her grandfather passed. Her handwriting had changed, her thoughts had deepened, but her heart, somehow, was whole again. She wrote, "We are no longer strangers trying to survive. We are a family learning to live. Nathan is no longer just a husband by name. He is a father, a partner, my home." That night, Nathan brought home takeout, and they had dinner on the living room floor. Clara curled up between them in her little bassinet. That there were no fancy candlelights, no music, just the quiet rhythm of new parenthood and two people who had, against all odds, chosen to stay. Before going to bed, Nathan paused at the doorway of the nursery. He stood there for a moment, watching Clara sleep, her tiny fists curled near her face. Emily came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "She's safe," he whispered. "She is." Emily agreed. Because she has you. He turned, cupping her face. No, she's safe because she has us. They didn't need vows anymore, no promises spoken aloud. They had been broken and rebuilt. They had fought and forgiven. They had become something neither of them had ever imagined. A family. And that, more than anything, was the real miracle. Love matures in the quiet hours, where ordinary life becomes extraordinary together. 3 months passed, not in a rush, but in gentle waves, feeding schedules, diaper changes, first smiles, midnight walks through the apartment just to soothe Clara's colic. The once foreign-word family had become their new normal, and yet, Emily sometimes found herself staring out the window, baby monitor in hand, wondering how she got here, not in doubt, but in awe. She, who had once been alone in the world, who had fought for every inch of her future, now had a daughter who squeezed her finger with surprising strength, and a husband who kissed her forehead. Every morning before he left for work, Nathan, too, was different. He still wore his white coat with authority, still ran the neurosurgical department with precision, but now, there were tiny signs of change. Drawings Clara made, pinned to his office board, a small photo of her tucked behind his ID badge, a baby sock accidentally hidden in his briefcase. He left work earlier, laughed more. He no longer flinched at emotion. He embraced it. Still, life wasn't seamless. One Thursday afternoon, Emily sat in the rocking chair, Clara asleep in her arms, exhaustion heavy in her bones. Her online medical courses were behind schedule, the laundry was never ending, and she hadn't showered in 2 days. Nathan walked in and immediately saw it on her face. "Go take a bath," he said gently. "I've got her." She shook her head. "There's too much to do. I have to catch up on lectures, and she'll wake up." And he interrupted, kneeling in front of her. "You don't need to earn rest. You deserve it." The words made her cry, not because she was sad, but because it had been a long time since someone reminded her that she was allowed to pause. That night, Nathan ran a bath for her, lit a candle, and sat outside the door with Clara just in case. She cried. Emily soaked in the silence, the warmth, and something else she hadn't felt in a while. Peace. Later, as they lay in bed, Clara asleep between them in a bassinet, Emily looked at Nathan, and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, brushing her hair back. "For choosing to be this, for staying, for learning how to love me the way I didn't even know I needed." He smiled. "You taught me how. Every day. Every breath." And then, almost shyly, he reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small velvet box. Emily froze. "What's that?" He opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate, simple ring, gold, with 3 tiny stones, one for each of them. "It's not a proposal," he said. "It's a beginning." She blinked, confused. "We married because we had to," he continued. "Then we stayed because we wanted to. But now, I want to start over. Not as strangers, not as a contract, as partners, as soulmates, as family." Emily's throat tightened. "I want us to choose this love every day," he whispered. "Not because we have to, because we believe in it." Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she nodded. Double quotes. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times, yes. They didn't need a new wedding, but they had just rewritten their vows, spoken not in ceremony, but in truth. Later that week, they returned to the cabin where everything had changed. This time, with Clara wrapped in a tiny knitted blanket, gurgling in Nathan's arms, they sat by the lake in silence. Emily rested her head on Nathan's shoulder. "She'll never know what we were before her," Emily said. "She only know what we became because of her," Nathan replied. And maybe that was the most beautiful kind of love. Not perfect, not planned, but born from chaos and forged in quiet bravery. They had walked through fire and emerged a family. Some milestones are marked by cake and candles, others by the hearts that survive to witness them. The house was filled with the smell of vanilla cake and the quiet chaos of balloons taped imperfectly to walls. There were streamers, handmade decorations, and a tiny paper crown waiting patiently on the high chair. Clara's first birthday had arrived. It wasn't a grand event. No rented venue or Instagram perfect spread, just the 3 of them, a few close friends, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude that lingered in every corner of their home. Emily stood in the kitchen, placing fruit slices into the shape of a flower on a small plate, Clara's favorite. Her eyes glanced over to the living room, where Nathan knelt on the floor, trying to assemble a pop-up ball pit, brows furrowed in intense concentration. "You know that came pre-assembled, right?" she called with a teasing grin. He looked up, sheepish. "You're sure?" Emily walked over and pressed a quick kiss to his temple. "Yes, doctor, I'm sure," Clara babbled from her playmat, waving a soft, stuffed giraffe in the air, her chubby legs kicking with excitement. It was hard to believe that a year ago, they were still figuring out how to hold her, how to hold each other now. They didn't just know how to hold on, they knew how to stay. Nathan rose and wrapped his arms around Emily from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She has your laugh," he said softly. "And you're stubborn." Eyes, they stood like that for a moment, just watching her, a tiny whirlwind of joy and wonder, completely unaware of the depth of healing she'd brought into their lives. When the doorbell rang, Clara squealed, recognizing the sound. Emily scooped her up while Nathan opened the door to Mrs. Patel and a few colleagues from the hospital. Everyone brought something: snacks, toys, laughter. But the most important thing in the room wasn't the cake or the gifts, it was the peace. The party was simple, but full of smiles, clumsy dancing, a few off-tune choruses of happy birthday, and a surprising number of adults trying to squeeze into the toddler ball pit. Later, after everyone had gone and the last balloon floated lazily across the floor, Emily and Nathan sat on the couch, Clara fast asleep between them. She never remembered today. Emily said, "No." Nathan agreed. "But we will." They looked around at the mess: wrapping paper, cake crumbs, a bib hanging off a lamp. It was perfect. Nathan leaned back and let out a slow breath. "I used to think milestones had to be big. Medals, degrees, published papers. But today," Emily looked at him. "Today." "What?" He smiled. "Today felt bigger than all of them." She nodded, curling into his side. "Because this one, we built together." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled, the kind that speaks of presence, of safety. Nathan glanced at the calendar on the wall. "I can't believe it's been a year," he murmured. Emily traced her finger gently over Clara's tiny hand. "We've come a long way." He looked at her, the depth in his gaze no longer cold or guarded, but warm, fiercely, tenderly present. "I never knew I could love like this," he admitted. She smiled. "You always could, you just didn't have a reason yet." He kissed her softly, a kiss that didn't need to prove anything. They had nothing to prove anymore, just a future to live. Before heading to bed, they paused by Clara's crib. Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. Nathan adjusted the blanket, and as they turned off the light, Emily whispered, "Happy birthday, my love. You saved us more than we ever saved you." And in the dark, Clara sighed contentedly in her sleep, as if she knew. Sometimes the story you never planned to write becomes the one you'll never stop telling. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm of love, celebration, and sugar-fueled laughter. Clara was asleep. The dishes were done. Nathan had passed out on the couch, one hand resting over a picture book he never finished reading. Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, the lamp above her casting a soft halo over a blank page. She hadn't journaled in months, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the first birthday. Maybe it was how grown Clara suddenly seemed. Or maybe it was the way Nathan had whispered, "I never knew I could love like this." With tears in his eyes, she opened her notebook and began to write. Not to herself this time, but to her daughter. To my Clara, you won't remember this version of me. You won't remember the sleepless nights I spent learning how to hold you just right. Or the way I cried quietly in the dark, afraid I wasn't enough for you. You won't remember how your father used to stand frozen by your crib, too afraid to blink in case you needed him. You won't remember how we whispered to each other at 2 a.m., voices low and hearts wide open. But I'll remember everything. I'll remember how your first cry cracked something open in him that had been locked for years. I'll remember the way he looked at you like you were a sunrise he thought he'd never see. And I'll remember how you made me brave enough to walk away, brave enough to come back, brave enough to love again. Because before you, I thought I was just surviving. Then you arrived, not as an answer, but as a beginning. You were the moment everything shifted. You didn't fix us. You revealed who we had the courage to become. You gave your father back his heart. You gave me the family I thought I lost. And I hope that, one day, when the world feels too heavy, you'll read this and know, you were never just born into love. You were made from it, Mom. She closed the notebook gently, her hands trembling, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming weight of gratitude. As she turned off the lamp and padded softly toward the bedroom, she paused at the living room doorway. Nathan was still asleep, his head tilted back, the faintest smile on his lips. He looked so peaceful, so human, so deeply hers. She sat beside him, rested her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "We made it." He stirred, just enough to pull her closer. "We're still making it," he murmured, half asleep, and he was right. This wasn't a finish line. It wasn't a happily ever after. It was a lived ever after. 1,000 little moments stitched together by choice, forgiveness, and love. Love that had once been inconvenient, then undeniable, then unconditional. Emily kissed the curve of his jaw, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, Clara would wake them up early, demanding attention and pancakes. There would be messes, diaper, disasters, long days, late nights. But tonight, in this quiet space between breaths, between memories and dreams, everything was exactly where it was meant to be. It was meant to be. The end of one chapter. The beginning of everything else. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold. When Nathan stood on the hospital roof, the same one he used to come to when he needed silence, when he needed to shut the world out. But this time, he wasn't running from anything. He was waiting. Downstairs, Emily was in the hospital cafe, sharing a muffin with Clara, who now toddled more than crawled. It was surreal how quickly time moved when you finally started living it instead of surviving it. Nathan looked out over the skyline, a cup of coffee warming his hands, and breathed in the crisp morning air. He thought about the man he used to be, about the deal he once made out of obligation, about the woman he thought he was helping, and how she ended up helping him more than he could have ever imagined. He still remembered that day, the test results, the terms, the ring that didn't mean anything, until it meant everything. Now it wasn't obligation that bound them, it was laughter, late-night talks, the smell of Clara's hair after a bath, the way Emily touched his back when he was lost in thought, the way he could breathe deeply. For the first time in years, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him and turned. Emily. Her coat was open, hair loose in the wind, cheeks flushed from the morning chill. She smiled. "You disappeared." He nodded. "Old habits." She walked to his side, wrapping her arms around his waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "Want to hear something crazy?" he asked. "Always. I used to come up here when I felt nothing, when I wanted to feel less now. It's where I come to remember how full my heart is." Emily looked up at him, eyes warm. "Then I'd say we've come full circle." "I think we've come full heart," he corrected with a soft smile. She laughed. "That was terrible." He kissed her forehead. "You love me anyway." Really do." They stood there for a long time, watching the city wake beneath them, the honking cars, the rising steam, the swirl of life in motion. Eventually, they headed back downstairs, Clara spotting them instantly and holding her arms up with a wide, toothy grin. Nathan picked her up, spinning her once before holding her close. She smelled like syrup and crayons. He kissed her head and looked at Emily, the woman who changed his life, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, steady love. They walked out into the sunlight, hand in hand, Clara giggling in her father's arms, no longer broken, no longer pretending, just living. And if anyone had told Nathan Carter, the cold, brilliant surgeon who once believed emotion was a weakness, that his greatest operation would be learning to open his heart, he would have laughed. But now he knew. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't start with fireworks. Sometimes they start with fear, with silence, with a contract, an end, with everything. A family, a home, a future rewritten, not with logic, but with love. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more beautiful and emotional romances just like this. Your support helps us keep creating stories that touch hearts.